Yes, dear student, today I'll be taking the last part of the unit determination of equilibrium level of income, employment and output. Earlier we discussed about the three types of equilibrium. One is called full employment equilibrium where the AD and AS intersect each other at full employment. The other is underemployment equilibrium where the AD and AS intersect each other before full employment. And there the problem of deficient demand arises, which is called aggregate demand becomes less than aggregate supply corresponding to full employment. And the other equilibrium, which is uh, beyond full employment, other equilibrium is beyond full employment, and in that case, the problem arises excess demand, where AD is greater than AS corresponding to full employment. So both deficient demand and excess demand must be checked for the smooth functioning of any economy. Why? Because deficient demand causes a deflationary gap, or you can say problem of deflation, that we call recession, where the price of different goods and services start falling, which is against the interest of farms and producers. And on the other hand, when we talk about excess demand, that is where the price of goods and services starts increasing, inflation, and which is against the interest of the consumers. So therefore, it is considered as a problem. And today we are going to discuss how to correct, how to solve this problem of deficient demand and excess demand. But before going to the remedy or how to check it, let us once again have little discussion. What is deficient demand? Deficient demand means when aggregate demand means demand for goods and services is less than aggregate supply corresponding to full employment. Now, why I'm using the word corresponding to full employment? Because if you look into the condition of deficient demand, AD and AS are intersecting each other. From that point of view, AD is equal to AS. But if we look into the economy and its potential, that if we use all the resources of the economy at that time, what is the aggregate supply, and then we compare, we find the aggregate demand is less than aggregate supply. That's why I'm saying corresponding to full employment means looking at full employment, right? Looking at full employment, here the demand for goods and services is less than supply of goods and services, that is called deficient demand. Now, what is the impact of deficient demand? If there will be less demand, so naturally the farms and producers will go for less production. They will reduce the production because already there is a less demand of their goods and services in the market. And when they will decrease the production, means they will minimize the use of resources. So what is going to happen to the employment? Employment is also going to reduce, is also going to decrease. So we can say that in case of deficient demand, the problem of unemployment takes place. Why? With the cut down in production, the farms start using less resources, means resources remain unused. That is called problem of unemployment. So problem of unemployment is the outcome of deficient demand. That's why it is very important for the economy to check the deficient demand or to correct the deficient demand. And what happens to the price? When there is a less demand in goods and services in the economy, so what will happen to the price? Price will start falling. So it causes deflation. Due to deficient demand, price of goods and services decreases. So what are the two problems arises because of deficient demand? One, due to less use of resources, problem of unemployment arises, and due to less demand, the problem in the fall of price of goods and services arises. And that's why it is important for the economy to come out of deficient demand. How economy will come out, soon we'll discuss. At the same time, if we talk about excess demand arises beyond full employment equilibrium. It means that if I use all the resources and even the aggregate demand is more than that, what we are written, aggregate demand is more than aggregate supply corresponding to full employment. It means aggregate demand has gone beyond aggregate supply. So therefore, in the economy, demand for goods and services is more as compared to flow of goods and services. When this happens, it is termed as excess demand. From the word itself, it is clear. What is excess? Demand. So therefore, when it is written excess demand, means more demand for goods and services. And when I am writing deficient demand, deficient means less. What is less? Demand. So when the demand for goods and services is less, that is called deficient demand, and when it is more, that is called excess demand. Now what happens to output, employment and price? If there is excess demand, more demand for goods and services, so naturally output will increase, the firms will increase the output. But the problem is this excess demand arises beyond full employment. It means already there is a full employment in the economy. So you don't have resources. So when you don't have resources, you cannot increase the output. So what will happen in case of excess demand? Your output is going to remain constant. Why it is going to remain constant? Because already economy is having full employment. So no resources left, no labor, no capital. From where you will increase the output? You cannot increase the output because there is full employment, and that's why the employment cannot be increased. So both employment and output are going to remain constant. And as a result, what will happen when you cannot increase the production because you cannot increase the employment and demand for goods and services more, then under excess demand, output can't be increased as there is full employment in the economy. Therefore, price of goods and services will increase. And what you call it? Inflation. And inflation is against the interest of the poor consumer. So therefore, both inflation and deflation, excess demand or deficient demands, are causing economic crisis, must be checked. Now the question is how to check, how to correct excess and deficient demand. If you look into excess demand, just like just now, just before I said, here the demand is more than supply. So how to get equality, how to correct this excess demand? There are two possibilities: either decrease the aggregate demand. Aggregate demand is more than aggregate supply. How to bring equality between these two, AD and AS? First way is, let us reduce the aggregate demand. And how we can reduce the aggregate demand? Aggregate demand means demand for goods and services. So why demand for goods and services more? Let us look into it. It means the people have more money in their pocket. So if we have to reduce the aggregate demand, what we will do? Will reduce the availability of credit or supply of money in the economy. When there will be less money available, when there will be less credit available, automatically what will happen to the purchasing power of the people? It will be less. If you have less money in your pocket, what will be your purchasing power? Less. If you have more money, more. So what we will do? First, we will reduce the availability of credit or supply of money in the economy. And when in the economy the money will be less, immediately the purchasing power of the people will less. And if your purchasing power is less, what will happen to your demand for goods and services? It will come down. It means that decrease in AD. And as the aggregate demand will decrease, you will be able to correct excess demand. So the first way of correcting the excess demand is decrease the aggregate demand. The other way is, what we are saying, aggregate demand is more than aggregate supply. How we can bring the equality between the two? Either decrease the aggregate demand or increase the aggregate supply. Second solution is increase in aggregate supply. Excess demand can also be checked by increasing aggregate supply, right? But you cannot increase aggregate supply within the country. Why? Because there is already full employment. So inside the country, you cannot increase the flow of goods and services because all resources are fully utilized. So this way, aggregate supply cannot be increased. The only way is you can increase the aggregate supply by importing or purchasing goods and services from rest of world. But this is not very feasible. This is not very appropriate. This is not a permanent remedy. So therefore, increase in aggregate supply is not possible. So we focus more for correcting excess demand on decrease in aggregate demand. Okay. So how we are going to correct the excess demand? By decrease in aggregate demand. That will be our focus. Then question, how to correct deficient demand? What is happening here? Here aggregate demand is less than aggregate supply. So same two solution. Aggregate demand is less. So if we have to correct deficient demand, let increase aggregate demand. How we can increase aggregate demand? How we can increase the demand for goods and services? Let us make more availability of credit in the market. Let us make more supply of money in the economy. When there will be more credit, more money in the market, what will happen to the purchasing power of the people? That is going to increase because people have more money in their pocket. So their purchasing power is going to increase. And if they can purchase more, what they will do? They will demand more for goods and services. What will happen to aggregate demand? It is going to increase. And what will happen? Deficient demand corrected. Other way is increase the decrease the aggregate supply. If there is a deficient demand, either you increase aggregate demand if you have to correct it, or you decrease aggregate supply. Now, deficient demand can also be checked by decreasing aggregate supply, which is not feasible solution. Because if you are going to decrease the aggregate supply, means you are going to decrease the flow of goods and services. This will make a negative impact over your national income, which is going to decrease. And that is going to affect your economic welfare. That is going to adversely affect the business. Firms will go for the shutdown. So economic crisis will be there. What you can do, excess aggregate supply, whatever excess is here, right? Whatever excess of aggregate supply, that can be adjusted by exporting to the rest of world. Whatever extra is there, suppose you have got total flow of goods and services of 100 crore and demand for goods and services is of 75 crore. So what is the excess of flow of goods and services? 25 crore. That 25 crore goods and services you can adjust by exporting to the rest of world. But again, the export doesn't depend upon your wish. The export depends upon whether the rest of world is having the demand for your goods and services or not. So what is the possible solution? Possible solution is not that adjust the surplus of aggregate supply by exporting the goods to rest of world. The possible solution is you have to increase the aggregate demand within the country. And how it is possible? You increase the purchasing power of the people. How we can push the purchasing power of the people? Make more money available to them. How? By providing easy, cheap credit through the commercial bank, and many other ways are there. So finally, what we concluded that if I have to correct the excess demand, what I will have to do? I will have to decrease the aggregate demand. And if I have to correct deficient demand, what I will do? Increase the aggregate demand. Now, how we go for it? There are two types of measures. There are two ways through which correct the excess demand and deficient demand. Again, I am repeating. For correcting the excess demand, what we will do? We will reduce the aggregate demand. And for correcting the deficient demand, what we will do? We will increase the aggregate demand. How? With the help of two policies, two measures. First is called fiscal policy. Fiscal. It is not physical. It is fiscal. Fiscal means related to finance. And what is fiscal policy? You might have studied government budget. In the government budget, we talks about the budgetary receipts and budgetary expenditure of the government, and that is called fiscal policy. So fiscal policy talks about the government's revenue policy and government expenditure policy. So fiscal policy refers to revenue and expenditure policy of government. It is also called budgetary policy of the government. So in the fiscal policy, what is included? The government's revenue and government's expenditure. So what are the main parts of the fiscal policy? One of the source of revenue is taxes. So taxes is the part of fiscal policy. Second source of revenue is public borrowings. When government borrow money from the public, through that government generates revenue. Third is deficit financing. When government finance the deficit by borrowing from rest of world of RBI, then generates the revenue. And how government is going to spend? In the form of public expenditure. What public expenditure? It's expenditure on, you can say, public welfare. It is expenditure on public work, construction of road, bridge and dam. It is expenditure on subsidies. It is expenditure on defense. So this is how the fiscal policy works. Now, these are the four components of fiscal policy we have taken broadly. What? Taxes, public borrowing, deficit financing, public expenditure. Now, one by one, we'll see how tax can correct the excess and deficient demand. How public borrowings, How deficit financing, how public expenditure. Here it is. The first we are going to study how to correct excess and deficient demand through taxes. Just before I said, if you have to correct the excess demand, what you have to do? You have to reduce the aggregate demand. So what we will do in case of excess demand, what government is going to do? Government will impose more taxes. If more taxes are imposed on us, what will happen to our purchasing power? If earlier the tax was 20% and I am having 100 rupees, I have to pay to government 20 rupees and 80 rupees was with me. My purchasing power was 80 rupees. But now if government is going to impose more taxes, suppose 30% tax, so now I will have only 70 rupees. So my purchasing power has been reduced from 80 rupees to 70 rupees. So what happens as government impose more taxes, it will adversely affect, means it will reduce the purchasing power of the people. And when their purchasing power will decrease, they will demand for less goods and services. And when there will be less demand for goods and services, what will happen? Your demand, aggregate demand will come down, and as a result, you will able to check excess demand. So by increasing the taxes, excess demand can be checked. And on the other hand, if there is a deficient demand, simple, government will reduce the taxes, people will have more money left in their pocket, their purchasing power will increase, and with the increase in their purchasing power, they will demand for more goods and services, and as a result, deficient demand will be checked. So in tax, by increasing tax, we check excess demand, by decreasing tax, we check deficient demand. Next, how to correct excess and deficient demand through public borrowings. What is public borrowing? I told you, government borrows money for the public welfare from the public. There is a lot of welfare scheme initiated by the government, and for those welfare scheme money is required, and sometimes government borrow money from public. And why public is going to lend money to the government? Because public is getting interest on it, right? What is the interest of the public? What motivates the public to lend their money to government? Because they are getting interest on it. So when government borrow money from public on interest, it is termed as public borrowings or public debt. If there is an excess demand, what government will do? Government will borrow money from the public. If government has borrowed money from you, so your money left in the pocket is going to increase or decrease? It is going to decrease. If you have given your money to the government, so money availability with you or in the market is going to decrease. And if there will be less money with the public, what will happen to their purchasing power? Their purchasing power is going to decrease. And immediately what will happen? The demand for goods and services will decrease. And what excess demand in the economy, it will be checked. On the other hand, if there is a deficient demand, what government will do? Government will reduce its public borrowings. Government will not borrow money from public. And when government is not going to borrow from you, you will have more money in your market. You will have more money in your pocket, more money with public. And you have more money means your purchasing power is going to increase. And when your purchasing power is more, you will demand for more goods and services. And what will happen? Economy will come out of the problem of deficient demand checked. So by increasing the public borrowings, excess demand checked. By decreasing the public borrowing, deficient demand checked. Moving to the next. How to correct excess and deficient demand through deficit financing. It's a new word for you. What is the meaning of deficit? Deficit means expenditure is more than revenue. Quite simple. You generally use, I have got a deficit. In my business, I am getting deficit. It means my expenditures are more than my revenue or income. Suppose your income is 100 rupees, but your expenditure is 200 rupees. So what is the deficit? 100 rupees. So from where you will arrange that deficit? From where you will fulfill that deficit? You will have to borrow money from someone. So same is in the case of government. If government expenditure is more than revenue, what we call it? Deficit. And to fulfill that deficit, to compensate that deficit, government borrow money from RBI or rest of world. That is called deficit financing. Okay. When government expenditure is more than revenue, that is called deficit. To compensate or to fulfill the deficit, government borrow money either from RBI or rest of world. That is called deficit financing. If government is borrowing more money, it means there is a more deficit. And if government is going to borrow more money, there will be flow of more money in the market, and that will increase the purchasing power. And if government is going for a less deficit, there will be less borrowings. When less borrowings are there, there will be less flow of the money in the market. So what happens if there is an excess demand? What is the government policy? To reduce the supply of money, so government will go for less deficit, and therefore there will be less deficit financing. If deficit will be less, so deficit financing means borrowing of the government will be less. So when government will borrow less money, there will be less borrowing, means less flow of money in the market. अगर गवर्नमेंट का डेफिसिट घाटा कम होगा, ओके, तो गवर्नमेंट डेफिसिट फाइनेंसिंग कम करेगी. जब डेफिसिट फाइनेंसिंग कम करेगी तो उसे बोरोइंग्स भी कम करनी पड़ेगी, और अगर उसकी बोरोइंग्स कम होगी तो मार्केट में पैसा क्या होगा? इट विल बी लेस. If there is a less money in the market, what will happen to the purchasing power of the people? That is going to reduce, and as a result people will demand for less goods and services. And what is checked? Excess demand. So if there is excess demand, government will reduce its deficit and deficit financing. If there is a deficient demand, government will go for more deficit. If there is more deficit, there will be more deficit financing. More deficit financing means government will have to borrow more money from RBI or from rest of world. When government is borrowing more borrowing means increase in the flow of money in the market. If this year the government budget, government has made the borrowing of 100 crore, so 100 crore will come in the market. So what will happen to the purchasing power of the people? That is going to increase. So what they will do? They will demand for more goods and services. And what is going to be corrected? Deficient demand. So if there is a deficient demand, what government is going to do? More deficit financing. And if there is an excess demand, what government is going to do? Less deficit financing. Now moving to the last part of the fiscal policy, that is how to correct excess and deficient demand through public expenditure. Public expenditure means government expenditure on public welfare, public work, subsidies, okay, defense. That is called public expenditure. If there is an excess demand, what government will do? Government will spend more in the market or less in the market. If government spend more in the market, if public expenditure will more money will come from government in the public, and that will increase their purchasing power. But in excess demand, what government wants? To decrease the purchasing power. So what government will do? Government will minimize its public expenditure. Government will not go for unnecessary public expenditure. Government will go only for necessary public expenditure. When government expenditure will reduce, there will be less flow of money in the market. When money will come less in the market, purchasing power of people will reduce or decrease. When they have less purchasing power, they will demand for less goods and services. And what is going to be checked? Excess demand. But on the other hand, if there is a deficient demand, what government is going to do? Government will increase its public expenditure. You might have seen or listened during the recession. Recession means deficient demand. Government initiates lot of projects, and that investment by the government is called autonomous investment. So why government is going for the investment? Why government is going for the expenditure? So that more money flow towards the market. Market means among the people. And when they will have more money, their purchasing power is going to increase. And what they will do? They will demand for more goods and services. And economy will recover from recession, or economy will recover from deficient demand. So if there is a deficient demand, government will increase its expenditure. If there is excess demand, government will reduce its expenditure. This is all about how through fiscal policy, government can either check the excess demand or check the deficient demand. Now moving to the next.